It was late in the office when my boss reached across the desk, placed her hand over mine, and didn't move it. I should have pulled away, but instead, my whole world. I remember that night more vividly than I probably should. The office was nearly empty, the kind of silence where even the hum of the lights feels louder than your own thoughts. Most people had gone home hours ago, but I was still at my desk, sorting through a mountain of reports. Across from me, in her glass-walled office, my boss was doing the same. She wasn't just any boss. She was the kind of woman people noticed without her trying. Early 40s, sharp, confident, always perfectly put together. I'd only been working under her for a few months, but in that short time, I'd come to admire not just her authority, but the way she carried herself. Like every word she spoke was measured, every gesture deliberate. That night, though, she looked different. Tired. A little softer somehow. Her jacket was draped over the back of her chair, her blouse sleeves rolled up. There was a looseness in her hair I wasn't used to seeing. For the first time, she looked less like the untouchable executive and more like a woman who had simply given too much of herself to the day. We ended up working side by side at the long conference table, papers spread between us. Every so often, our arms brushed as we reached for the same folder or scribbled notes. I kept telling myself it was nothing, that I was reading too much into it. But then it happened. She leaned forward to straighten a document, and her hand landed squarely over mine. Warm, steady, and she didn't move it. The world seemed to stop. My breath caught in my throat. I could hear the faint tick of the clock on the wall, the muffled sound of rain against the windows, even the scratch of her pen as she paused mid-note. But her hand remained on mine. Calm, unhurried, almost as if she had forgotten to pull away. I glanced at her, unsure what I'd see. She didn't look flustered. She didn't apologize. Instead, she kept her eyes on the papers, her lips pressed together in thought, as if this small act wasn't worth acknowledging. But for me, it was everything. My skin tingled where her palm pressed against the back of my hand. The warmth spread up my arm, into my chest, leaving me both unsettled and unwilling to move. Seconds passed, maybe more, maybe less. I couldn't tell anymore. Finally, she lifted her hand and slid the document toward me, as though nothing unusual had happened. My own hand remained exactly where it had been, suddenly colder, suddenly too aware of the empty air where her touch had been. I didn't say a word, neither did she. But as I gathered the papers and pretended to focus, one thought kept circling in my mind. Was it an accident? Or was it something else? That night, walking home beneath the rain, I replayed it over and over. The weight of her hand, the stillness of the room, the way my heart had quickened. And though I tried to convince myself it meant nothing, deep down I already knew. Something had shifted. Went quiet. The next morning, I walked into the office carrying the weight of a secret no one else could see. The air smelled of fresh coffee and printer ink, the usual mix, but everything felt different. I kept thinking of her hand over mine, of how she didn't pull away. It had been such a small moment, something so easy to dismiss, and yet, it lingered like an echo inside me. She was already at her desk when I arrived. Hair pinned back neatly this time, jacket on, her posture once again composed and professional. If she felt what I felt last night, she didn't show it. She greeted me with the same calm, clipped tone she always used, her eyes scanning her emails while she spoke. But when she finally looked up, our eyes met. Just for a second. It wasn't much, barely noticeable to anyone else, but to me it felt loaded, like a quiet acknowledgement of something we weren't supposed to admit. She looked away quickly, almost too quickly, and I tried to laugh it off in my head. Still, throughout the day, I caught her glancing at me during meetings, her gaze lingering a beat longer than necessary. When she spoke, her words were direct, efficient, but her body language betrayed her. Subtle shifts, like the way her fingers tapped against her pen when I leaned forward, or how she adjusted her glasses before asking for my input, even though she rarely asked before. I tried to bury myself in work, but the silence between us had a gravity of its own. It wasn't uncomfortable exactly, but it was heavy. Every time she passed by my desk, every time her voice carried across the room, I felt it pulling me in. At one point, I was presenting something to the team. My words flowed, but in the corner of my vision, I could see her watching me. Not with the detached authority of a boss, but with a sharper focus. Almost as if she was studying me. And when I made a nervous joke to ease the tension in the room, I heard it, her laugh. Quick, low, almost hidden. But it was there. Caught me off guard, warming me more than it should have. I told myself I was imagining things. That she was simply tired, or distracted, or that last night had meant nothing more than a coincidence. Yet, when I handed her a stack of documents later that afternoon, her fingers brushed mine again. Light, fleeting, but deliberate. She didn't look at me. She didn't say a word. She just kept flipping through the papers while I stood there, my heart pounding like it had no business doing. By the end of the day, I realized something important. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. And in that silence between us, I could feel an entire conversation waiting to be had. One we both seemed too afraid to start. The days that followed felt different, though nothing was ever spoken aloud. On the surface, everything remained perfectly professional. She was still my boss, sharp and decisive in meetings, respected by everyone in the office. But in the quieter moments, I started to notice little shifts, subtle, almost imperceptible changes that no one else seemed to pick up on. She began involving me in projects she normally handled alone. "I trust your judgment," she'd say in that calm, measured tone of hers. Sounded simple, but to me those words carried weight. They felt like an invitation, not just into the work, but into her space, into her trust. Her office became a place I found myself in more often. At first, it was always about work, deadlines, reports, strategies. But then there were moments that slipped through the cracks. Like the afternoon she noticed I looked tired and slid her cup of coffee across the desk toward me without saying a word. Or the time I walked in with my shirt slightly wrinkled, and she reached out absent-mindedly to smooth the crease on my shoulder before realizing what she'd done. Each gesture was small, innocent if taken alone, but together they built a rhythm, a quiet language only the two of us seemed to understand. I started seeing sides of her no one else did. When the office was busy, she was unshakable, commanding. But in the late hours, when most people had left, I'd sometimes catch her leaning back in her chair, eyes closed for just a moment longer than she should have allowed herself, or staring out the window at the city lights, her expression softer, distant, as though she was somewhere else entirely. It was in those moments that I realized something. What drew me to her wasn't just her authority, or the respect she commanded. It was her vulnerability, the quiet hum of loneliness I sensed beneath all that composure. It made her human. It made her real. One evening, she stood beside me at the copier, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear, and I caught a faint trace of her perfume. Something subtle, elegant, like her. For a second, neither of us moved. And when I turned to hand her the papers, our fingers grazed again. This time she looked at me, just briefly but long enough for me to know she felt it too. After that, I couldn't pretend anymore. I told myself I was imagining it, that she was simply kind, simply thoughtful, simply professional. But the truth was undeniable. There was something building between us. Something quiet. Something dangerous. Something that made even the smallest touch feel electric. And for the first time, I wasn't sure which scared me more, what it meant if I was right, or what it meant if I was wrong. It was another late evening in the office, the kind where the city outside had already gone quiet, but we were still buried in deadlines. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly above, and the sound of her pen scratching across the page was the only thing breaking the silence. I should have been exhausted, but I wasn't. Not really. Because I was sitting across from her again, close enough to notice the way her hair had slipped loose from its clip, close enough to catch the faint sigh she let out when she thought no one was listening. We were working on a project that demanded absolute focus, but my mind kept drifting. To the sound of her voice, the curve of her wrist as she wrote, the slight crease between her brows when she concentrated. Every detail felt sharper at this hour, as if the night stripped away the distance she usually kept between us. At one point, she set her pen down and looked at me. Not the quick, efficient glances she gave during the day, but something slower, more deliberate. "You've been putting in long hours," she said softly. "I noticed these things." I managed to smile. "I could say the same about you." That earned me the faintest laugh, low and genuine, the kind she rarely let slip in the office. She leaned back in her chair, studying me with a curious expression, as though she was trying to figure out something she hadn't allowed herself to before. Then her hand brushed against mine again as we reached for the same folder. This time, neither of us pulled back immediately. Her touch lingered, just long enough for my chest to tighten, just long enough for the air between us to feel heavier than it should. She hesitated, then asked, "What is it you want? Really? From all this?" Her voice was softer than usual, almost cautious. I blinked. "From the job. From life," she corrected. Her gaze didn't waver. I wasn't sure how to answer. Most people didn't ask me questions like that, not seriously. But there was something in her tone, something vulnerable, that made me want to be honest. I told her about my ambitions, the things I wanted to build, the fear of wasting time. And as I spoke, I realized she wasn't just listening as a boss. She was listening as a woman, as someone searching for a piece of herself in what I was saying. When I finished, she leaned back, exhaled slowly, and for a moment her guard slipped completely. Her eyes softened, and she whispered almost to herself, "You remind me of how alive I used to feel." The words hung between us, fragile and heavy at the same time. I didn't know what to say, so I said nothing. We just sat there, the quiet hum of the city outside filling the space between us. And in that silence, I knew something had shifted again, deeper this time, something neither of us could take back. The days after that conversation carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I kept hearing her words in my head. "You remind me of how alive I used to feel." They weren't the kind of words you could pretend away, not when spoken in the stillness of a nearly empty office. But the more I thought about it, the more the risks began to take shape in my mind. She was my boss, respected, admired. She had worked years, decades, to build her reputation, to earn the authority she carried so effortlessly. And me? I was just starting out, still trying to prove myself. The very idea of us together didn't just seem unlikely, it felt almost dangerous. That tension followed us everywhere. In meetings, she sat across the table from me, poised and confident, giving directions with her usual clarity. And yet, beneath all of that, I could feel it, that invisible thread pulling between us. I'd catch her watching me for half a second too long before looking away. Or I'd notice her hand lingering on the table near mine, just close enough to tempt, but never close enough to touch. The hardest part was pretending nothing existed when everything inside me said otherwise. Sitting across from her in a room full of colleagues, I could feel the echo of her words, the memory of her touch, and the silence between us that had grown heavier than ever. One evening, as the office emptied out, I found myself alone in the hallway with her. She was locking her office door, her expression unreadable. For a moment, it was just us and the muted glow of the exit sign overhead. She hesitated, then spoke without looking at me. If anyone knew, they wouldn't see me the same. Her voice was steady, but I heard the vulnerability threaded beneath it. She wasn't just talking about the office. She was talking about herself, about her image, her career, her life. I swallowed hard, not sure what to say. The easy answer would have been to reassure her, to promise secrecy, to tell her not to worry. But what came out instead was quieter, more instinctive. "I don't see you the way they do," I said. "I see you." She finally looked at me then, and in her eyes I saw something raw, fear, yes, but also longing. It was a look that spoke louder than any words she could have chosen. A look that told me she wanted something she wasn't sure she was allowed to want. Neither of us moved closer. Neither of us crossed that line. But in that suspended moment, I realized the truth. This wasn't just about desire. It was about risk, about whether either of us was brave enough or foolish enough to step into what we both knew was there. And as she walked past me, her shoulder brushing mine ever so slightly, I knew the question wasn't if we'd cross it. It was when. It was the kind of night that belonged in stories. Heavy rain against the windows, the city outside blurred by water and shadow. Most of the office had left early, but we stayed behind, trying to finish a report that couldn't wait until morning. Around 9, the storm worsened, and then it happened. The lights flickered once, twice, before the power cut out completely. The hum of the air conditioning stopped, the screens went dark, and silence pressed in. For a moment, neither of us moved. She reached across the desk, feeling for her phone, and the faint glow of its screen lit her face in soft blue light. Then she switched on a small desk lamp connected to the backup generator, casting the room in a warm, flickering glow. Shadows danced along the walls, and suddenly the space felt less like an office and more like something else. She leaned back in her chair, exhaling a laugh. "Well, I guess we're stuck here for a while." I don't know why, but hearing her laugh like that, unguarded, almost playful, shifted something inside me. It wasn't the controlled, polished version of her that everyone else saw. It was lighter, freer. A glimpse of the woman beneath the title, the one I'd only seen in rare moments. I found myself smiling. Could be worse. At least I have good company. Her eyes flickered to mine, and for a second, the joking tone faded. Something heavier settled between us. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the desk, studying me as though trying to read something I hadn't said out loud. The rain pounded harder against the glass, but inside, everything felt still. My hand moved almost before I realized it, sliding across the desk, reaching for hers. And when my fingers brushed against hers, she didn't pull away. She let me take her hand. Her skin was warm, soft, steady. I felt her thumb twitch slightly, as if resisting the urge to tighten her hold, before she finally gave in. Our fingers intertwined, and in that moment, the tension of the past weeks collapsed into silence. A silence that didn't need words. She closed her eyes briefly, then leaned forward, resting her forehead gently against my shoulder. My chest tightened at the weight of her, the trust in that simple gesture. I could smell the faint trace of her perfume, mixed with the rain drifting in through the cracked window. Neither of us spoke. We didn't need to. The world outside could have disappeared, and I wouldn't have noticed. I wanted to tell her everything, that I'd been drawn to her since the first day, that every glance, every touch had felt like a thread pulling me closer. But I stayed quiet, because sometimes words only break what silence holds together. So I sat there, holding her hand, feeling the steady rhythm of her breathing against my shoulder, knowing this moment was fragile, fleeting, and more real than anything else I'd known in a long time. The next morning, everything looked different. The storm had passed, sunlight poured through the office windows, and the building hummed with its usual rhythm of footsteps, phones ringing, and the low buzz of conversation. But inside me, nothing felt normal. I couldn't stop thinking about the night before, her hand in mine, the warmth of her leaning against me, the way silence had spoken louder than words ever could. It hadn't been dramatic. There were no declarations, no lines crossed that couldn't be taken back. And yet, it changed everything. When I walked into the office, she was already there, perfectly composed, as if the storm had never happened. Her hair pinned neatly, her jacket fitted, her tone brisk as she spoke with another colleague. To anyone else, she was the same woman she always was, untouchable, authoritative, in control. But when her eyes found mine across the room, something flickered. Brief, fragile, but unmistakable. A recognition, a reminder. The day went on like any other. Emails, meetings, deadlines. But the silence between us felt fuller, charged with something unspoken. Every time I passed her office, I felt it. Every time she called my name, I heard it in her voice. Late in the afternoon, when most people had gone, she asked me to stay back. We worked quietly for a while, side by side at the long table. But neither of us was really focused. Finally, she set down her pen and looked at me. Not as a boss, not as someone keeping up appearances, but as a woman who had something she could no longer leave unsaid. "I don't know what this means," she admitted softly, her fingers brushing the edge of the papers in front of her. "I don't know where it goes, but I don't want to pretend it didn't happen. Her words carried weight. Fear, honesty, and hope tangled together. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Then let's not. For a moment, neither of us moved. The world outside kept spinning. Phones rang somewhere down the hall. A door closed. The rainwater from last night still dripped faintly outside. But at that table, it was just us. She reached across, slower this time, deliberate. Her hand found mine, and again, she didn't move it. Only this time, I didn't question it. I didn't wonder if it was an accident, or a slip, or something she'd forget. I turned my hand over and laced my fingers with hers, steady and certain. We didn't need to say anything more. There was no guarantee, no promise of forever. But there was this moment, real, undeniable, ours. And as the sunlight stretched across the table and touched both our hands, I realized something simple yet certain. Sometimes the future doesn't need to be defined right away. Sometimes it's enough just to hold on. She didn't move her hand, and I didn't want her to. If this story moved you, don't forget to like the video, subscribe for more slow burn age gap romances, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear if you've ever experienced a moment that felt just as unspoken, but unforgettable.